All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here are doing our preview and prediction for an interesting Big 12 matchup between Colorado and UCF. Buffalo's going on the road to Orlando as 14-point dogs. 62.5 is the total. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox. Look at the Colorado offense coming off an incredibly resilient game, probably the most resilient one we've saw in the Deion Sanders era, Nick, where they probably should have lost this game. I'm sure they had less than a 1% shot to win it. They are at the end where Baylor misses a field goal to go up 2 scores late. They put themselves in a position to throw a Hail Mary. The play before that one was caught. It was dropped by Will Shepard right there at the goal line, essentially. They end up getting it the second time right, though, and they end up going to overtime, forcing a fumble at the goal line out of the back of the end zone to win the game. Very impressive effort there. They didn't give up one bit, Nick. Got to be pleased with what you saw from the Buffaloes. Shitter Sanders, 341 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's got 11 touchdowns and 2 picks this year on top of 335 per game. And obviously, when we talk about this team, we allude to how electric this passing attack is. And that was no secret. We said from day one when last year that they would be good through the air, and they just continued to get better. This is a great 4-man lineup they have, headlined by Travis Hunter, 472 and 5 scores this year. Jimmy Horn, LaJohntay Wester, both have 18 receptions each. Then Will Shepard right there with 13. Amorian Miller finally was able to make some contributions. 2 grabs for 71 yards and a big touchdown. So Colorado, they have greatness in this passing attack. There's no secret there. Going on the road here to Orlando, though, last time they went on the road to a somewhat rowdy home environment. Obviously, Nebraska is much tougher than UCF's going to be. It's going to be loud, though. They didn't look so good throwing the football. They struggled and only scored 10 points. The expectations here, they'll be much better.
At one point during that game against Baylor, the Baylor Bears had a 99.3% chance to win the game near the end of the fourth quarter there before Colorado pulled off an absolute miracle, giving Deion, dare I say, a signature win at home, pulling off an upset in that sort of situation, given the percentage that Baylor had to win that game. That fumble at the end of the game sealed the deal, and the fans stormed the field and went nuts. This passing attack has been phenomenal so far for Colorado. We knew it was going to be pretty strong, but I think it's exceeding a lot of people's expectations. 335 yards per game through the air, 2.8 passing touchdowns per game for Shitter Sanders, who was 11 on the season, 67% comp rate, 1,300 yards passing, and 2 picks for him. He's looked really comfortable in the pocket. He's, fixing some of the mistakes we saw last year where he would take a lot of sacks and would throw reckless balls. He's fixing those issues, which I think is really solid. Travis Hunter's been phenomenal. He's continuing to prove that he is one of the best athletes in college football. Just absolutely phenomenal what he's able to do on both sides of the ball with that 472 yards receiving, 12.8 yards to grab, and 5 scores. He's been a really big key here. LaJohntay Wester, obviously, he's been an underrated player that's been getting more targets in this offense, 226 yards for him, and 4 touchdowns, catching that game-tying touchdown, obviously. And then Jimmy Horn, who really I don't think has had the best of seasons, 15.9 yards to grab, 1 score, and 286 on 18 receptions. I expected more out of Horn. Wonder if he'll get more targets in this game against UCF. I like what this passing attack has been able to do. Obviously, they're fun to watch. They're very exciting every single week, and expect them to go after this UCF defense that is not very good against the pass at all.
Yeah, Jimmy Horn had 198 in the opener, 40 or less in the next 3. Obviously, he's a downfield speedy weapon that they have. You certainly want to see him get more involved. Look at this running game. There's still nowhere really to be found. Less than 70 yards per game. Michael Welsh and Isaiah Augustive have really taken over as the top 2 running backs. Dallin Hayden still in the rotation as well. They looked solid against Colorado State, 109 yards. They had, moments of, some stability, I guess you could say. Against Baylor, less than 100 rushing. They did have 3 touchdowns, though, so they're able to step up a little bit. And it seems like they've kind of progressed in that area, but for the most part, not really. And obviously, the sacks that Sanders takes kind of lowers that number as well. But they're not very efficient running the ball one bit. Don't expect them to do so here in this game. But the offensive line, still, kind of an inconsistent performance. Jordan Seaton looked great in that win against Baylor at left tackle, a true freshman. Obviously, he's going to continue to grow at times. Certainly don't have too many high expectations for him as a young player in September. Tyler Brown at left guard's really been no good, giving up 14 pressures already. Hank Zelinskis, he's been inconsistent, but he's also really not been that good on the interior. Khalil Benson, coming off an absolutely horrendous game, has allowed 3 sacks this year. Whenever Justin Mayers is on the field, his respective guard spot when he is on the field, I think he is probably one of their best players on the interior. And Phillip Houston's actually been a pretty good guy at paving the way on the ground, but he's also given up a fair amount of pressures as well. The offensive line's still an issue, Nick. I think they're still last in sacks allowed. Yeah, 16 through 4 games. certainly a problem, right? And, going against UCF, who has a pretty good defensive line, you can't run the ball. It doesn't seem to affect the passing attack too much, but when it comes down to games like this where you're an underdog and they're going to be close contests, like against Baylor, they should have lost. They didn't, though. It's not going to be like that every week where you can make, Hail Mary-like plays. You have to be able to protect better. You have to be able to go on the road and be consistent. It just seems like right now for Colorado, that's going to be the biggest issue with them.
Giving up 4 sacks per game is obviously not a good number so far this season. This offensive line is continuously struggling, although there have been bright performances by Phillip Houston and Jordan Seaton, especially Seaton, who's getting a lot of love in the national media for a strong game against Baylor, and certainly respects to him, but the rest of the offensive line is not holding up their end of the bargain. This team's not able to run the ball. 0 rushers with over 100 yards on the ground for the entire season, with Michael Welch being the closest to 87 yards and 2 scores. Just not good enough at all. We knew this Colorado rushing attack was not going to be good this year, but they are not getting anywhere near sort of the success that they need to, and that's certainly going to be a problem if Shedeur is struggling to find time and struggling to complete passes in this game. This team could be in a lot of trouble because this UCF offense is a very strong unit as well. Now, of course, we're going to talk about the defense a little bit, where I think that Colorado has a nice matchup against this UCF passing defense, but I'm worried they're not going to be able to run the ball at all against this UCF front defensive unit. They're going to rely on the pass a lot in this game, and that's going to have to be the key for them to figure this game out.
And moving to the UCF offense, they got a bye week after, a nice, comeback against TCU. Phenomenal rushing attack. They're averaging 375 yards per game this year, tops in the country. Had almost 300 again against TCU. So even the numbers may be skewed a little bit because they're beating up on poor opponents, they still look very sound against the Frogs. RJ Harvey, this guy's great. 448, 8 touchdowns, plenty of speed, a nice slashing runner at 5'9", 208. Penny Boone, on the other hand, hasn't been getting as many touches as you expected, only 8 carries per game. He's averaging over 6.5 per carry. Miles Montgomery's been a pleasant surprise for them. And then, of course, KJ Jefferson at quarterback. These guys all have over 40 yards per game rushing. What do you make of this rushing attack, Nick? Colorado certainly showed up their run defense a good bit, but this is a matchup unlike any other. And I think this is one that, a lot of people are expecting UCF to just run away with it. I don't think it'll be a complete cakewalk, but just the offense Malzahn runs just makes them incredibly difficult to stop, and you're seeing that in the production.
And when you look at that 375 yards per game on the ground is a really impressive number. This is an offense that is able to run the ball at a very effective clip over and over again and get production out of it. They have 4.3 rushing touchdowns per game, a really impressive stat as well. KJ Jefferson has been really strong on the ground at times, but we've yet to see him fully unleash his opportunity. RJ Harvey has led the way with 8 rushing touchdowns, 448 yards rushing, 7.6 yards per carry. Really strong performance from Harvey, who's been the big leader for this backfield. Expect big things out of him. Jefferson certainly needs to have a little bit better of a passing game, I think. He still needs to try and find that full balance in this offense. I do think, 195 yards per game through the air is not enough for this offense right now in terms of balancing it with the rushing attack. But you got to be happy with what you've seen out of Penny Boone, Miles Montgomery, RJ Harvey, all having really solid games, plus KJ Jefferson, who has that ability to absolutely break out and use his legs there. I like what this offense is able to do. 375 yards per game on the ground. Yeah, that's a pretty impressive number.
Yeah, speaking of that passing attack, Jefferson and company in the first 2 weeks against pretty woeful opponents, they struggled in the drop-back passing game, and it wasn't pretty. Against TCU, they were better, had 13 completions for 230 and 3 touchdowns, including one late in the game, the Kobe Hudson, to win them that contest. I certainly think they're going to start to unleash this offense a little bit more because they've just been pounding the rock. 55 attempts per game. That's, Service Academy level numbers that they're rolling out with. Maybe in this matchup they might not have to. Kobe Hudson, though, has been elite. 310, 2 touchdowns through the air. Randy Pittman has 6 receptions. Xavier Townsend as well. Only has 19 yards on those, though. They're not showing much variety with this offense. I think they're better at receiver than they're showcasing right now. Javaris Johnson's not seeing really the field at all. Gerard Baker not seeing any targets. So it's been kind of strange to see this offense, Nick. And again, it's only 3 games into the year, but at some point you think they're going to start to uncork it a little bit more and start to spread the ball around. But I guess if it's not broke, don't fix it. And in this matchup, they might just be able to run the ball continuously like they have and be successful doing so.
That's certainly a fair point. If they broke, don't fix it. They don't have to throw the ball yet this season because they have such incredible strength on the ground. When you look at Jefferson, right, 60% comp rate, 563 yards passing, 5 touchdowns and a pick. So he's hasn't turned the ball over a whole lot, but not a lot of attempts there with 51 passing attempts. Kobe Hudson getting most of the targets there. His 310, 23.8 yards to grab and 2 scores is extremely impressive. Miles Montgomery, RJ Harvey each have a receiving touchdown out of the backfield. So they don't really have to throw the ball a whole lot. They're not trying to find a lot of different targets here. They're not really spreading the wealth a whole lot. Which if it's working, fine, keep going. This team's undefeated for a reason. I have no reason to suspect they'll have issues running the ball against a Colorado defense that has struggled in the past against the run. I think they'll be able to figure it out just fine. It's just something that I want to keep an eye on. Can this, team, can Gus Malzahn's team figure out how to throw the ball a little bit better? They have solid wide receivers. I want to see what they look like. Maybe, later in the game, they could potentially throw the ball a little bit more and get more comfortable with that. I'd like to see what this passing attack can do because I have not been impressed so far. They really haven't unleashed them.
Now looking at the UCF O-line, the tackles, Paul Roulette on the right side, and on the left side, Amari Kite. They've been phenomenal on the interior. Adrian Medley has been a really good run blocker. Not as much in pass pro, though. Caden Kettler has been a very consistent center. And Marcellus Marshall, a veteran at right guard, is playing very good as well. Certainly could be a little bit more powerful, though, in terms of paving the way for the ground game. Looking at the Colorado defense they'll be matching up with, a team that's really, found their footing against the run. The most they've allowed all year was this past weekend, 166 against Baylor. Held North Dakota State to only 157. That was a physical test that they did a pretty good job of handling. It's been pretty impressive so far, Nick. Against Nebraska, the Huskers, I thought, had a pretty good game against them. They had a lot of big plays called back on penalties. For what it's worth, so they're certainly an above-average run defense at this moment in time, and I think that a lot of these transfers they went out and got have been highly beneficial in that improvement. B.J. Green, a phenomenal fan of his, coming off the edge. Shane Cokes is playing much better ball than he did last year. Dayon Hayes, another impressive transfer. Amari McNeil, Samuel Okunlola, Arden Walker. Just to name a couple of guys that have been really good, and then Chidozie Nwankwo, whatever his status is, he's been an impressive player for them. Didn't play against Baylor. This is a D-line that's much better, Nick. We'll get to the linebackers as well in a second because they've contributed a good bit to this run defense. But how do you think they'll fare against the UCF O-line that I just mentioned?
I think this is not a bad run defense at all. I think they've shown some solid strength. 150 yards per game given up is not a terrible number considering where they were last year. Dayon Hayes has been really strong. 16 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him. Shane Cokes looked better. 12 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack. Plus B.J. Green, a really solid piece off the edge. 6 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss for him. They've got some help from the linebackers as well. I've been impressed with this defensive line. They certainly look a lot better than they did last year, where you could really just torch them immediately. Some of the bigger pieces in the middle there have stood up to the test so far. I like Green a lot coming off the edge. I'm thinking that he could potentially have a nice game here against UCF.
Certainly want to monitor Nwankwo's injury status because he didn't play against Baylor, and they'll certainly need him to be back on the interior if they want to be good against the run. Levante Bentley playing much better this year against the run, a much more consistent tackler. Very happy with his improvements. Nakai Hill-Green as well has been looking very strong so far. Got to be happy with how these guys have progressed as well, and we'll see now that they enter conference play how they will really fare against tough opponents. But last week they passed the test pretty well, Nick. Baylor is certainly capable of running for a lot more yards than they did. This will be the ultimate test of them all, though. I don't care what physicality North Dakota State may play with, what talent Nebraska might have. This scheme and what RJ Harvey and his O-line can accomplish, and of course KJ Jefferson, whenever they elect to get him going, this will be the ultimate test of discipline and physicality, I'd say, here against the Knights.
This is a pretty big test, certainly, but this linebacking core has stood up to the test they've faced so far. Hill-Green, 23 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss. Levante Bentley looks a lot better. 19 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, plus a forced fumble that he recovered. Trevor Woods, 14 total tackles and a tackle for loss for him as he's been used in a variety of different roles. Jeremiah Brown as well as rotational piece with 6 total tackles. I've been happy with what this linebacking core has been able to do so far. They looked really solid in the interior there. Again, they're facing a tough rushing attack here where they will certainly have to earn their stripes in this matchup, but I believe that they have a strong possibility to be strong, hold up in this, and figure it out.
Yeah, Trevor Woods, a guy who's certainly a mismatching coverage for this defense, starting to see less and less snaps after a pretty poor effort in week 1. So we'll see if he gets on the field, and certainly something they're going to look to take advantage of if he does. Look at the secondary for Colorado, another group that has also improved a great deal. In week 1, they allowed a lot of free space, a lot of completions allowed in the first 2 weeks, where both opponents had 77% or more. It's been held to under 60% the last 2 weeks. A lot of people felt maybe Colorado State could replicate their performance from last year's matchup. They were unable to do so. forced 2 interceptions, only 209 yards, and then Baylor, they didn't do anything either. They did have 2 touchdowns, but less than 150 and a 50% comp rating. So they've really improved, and we talk about how UCF doesn't really have much of a passing attack at this moment in time, but staying disciplined against play action, I can totally see, an opportunity where they're running the ball very well, and they decide to just do a random play action to a tight end who's wide open on a wheel route or something, Nick. So they got to be aware of that if they're getting grinded down on. Of course, Travis Hunter is elite. Won them the game against Baylor with that goal line fumble. DJ McKinney's been the other starting corner. Has been pretty good. Colton Hood, whenever he's on the field, I think maybe you could take advantage of him. Preston Hodge hasn't been all that great. Pretty inconsistent player from the slot position. And then, at free safety, Carter Stroudemeyer has been taking over for Shiloh Sanders. It's been all right up until this point. But these safeties right here, Nick, these guys don't really scream, great abilities when it comes to being, run fits. And that's something they have to be important and do very well in this game. Shiloh Sanders, obviously, he's going to be missed tremendously because I felt like this is a matchup where he would have had an opportunity to shoot right downhill and make a lot of good plays. Cameron Selman-Craig, he's played a lot in the box. He's a safety. I think he'll be pretty solid at stopping the run here, at least getting into the box and being effective. That's a big concern for me though, Nick, because Shiloh not being there, he would have thrived in this, but he's not going to be playing, which is certainly something Colorado's not going to be happy with.
I share some of your concerns with the ability of the run defense missing Sanders, who I think is a really solid player in the run defense. The secondary has been a lot better this year. I've been impressed with what they've been able to do so far this season. 65% comp rate, 208 yards per game given up and 1 touchdown per game. So I think it's a solid numbers. Selman-Craig has been really good, top leading tackler for this team, 30 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss. DJ McKinney, 26 total tackles, a tackle for loss, 5 pass breakups. Really good coverage asset. Travis Hunter, phenomenal athlete, 14 total tackles. Forced fumble that saved the game, 2 pass breakups, an interception for him, a tackle for loss. He's a do-it-all guy. Expect another big day out of him. Stoudemire's been good, 13 total tackles, 2 pass breakups. Preston Hodge, 11 total tackles, 2 pass breakups and a pick. Colton Hood, 6 total tackles and 2 pass breakups. So really good numbers across the board. Been very happy with the secondary, and they're not going to be really tested here. So can they, help out in the run game? Can they potentially load the box and sort of figure out ways to stop the Central Florida rushing attack that's going to be very strong and a very active unit on the ground?
Hey, again, like you said, probably won't be tested all that much, but they got to be disciplined. Hudson on Travis Hunter will be a phenomenal matchup out wide. When they do decide to throw the football, looking at this UCF defense, a unit that, so far against the run has been great. They did play 2 nobodies really in the first 2 weeks against TCU. That's a team that can certainly hurt you. They only ran it 17 times for less than 60 yards. Good defensive line here. Dalton Dotson on the interior stepped up immensely. Nejlik Kelly, the transfer from Miami, is a phenomenal player. Matthew Alexander, Jamal Johnson, Lee Hunter, another one of those veterans. They got some really good players here on this D-line. Production hasn't been all that ideal. They do have 14 TFL. They only had 1 against TCU, though. They only have 1 sack all year long. That's certainly not great either, and that was against Sam Houston State. So in terms of defensive ends and guys on the interior, I'm confident in. Ricky Barber being another one of those. These guys are veterans. They've all played a lot of football. But in terms of outside pass rush presence, Nick, I just don't think they have too much of that, and that could be a problem against this great passing attack. But at the same time, your strength matches up with their weakness, the interior D-line against the interior O-line. So maybe it might not be that bad after all.
This is certainly a matchup that you want to keep an eye on because these stats are not phenomenal from this defensive line in terms of tackles for loss or sacks. Like you said, Nikhil Kelly has the only sack for this team, 8 total tackles for him plus a pass breakup. Lee Hunter has 5 total tackles, tackle for loss. Ricky Barber has 4 total tackles as a veteran player. Dalton Dotson has been a guy that's got 8 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss. You've seen him in the backfield a little bit more as he's playing at defensive tackle. Yes, I want to see this pass rush improve, but I think you have a nice matchup here against a weak at times Colorado offensive line and a very bad rushing attack. This could be a really solid thing in favor for this Knights defense.
One thing we talked about in the offseason was the UCF linebacking group and how poor they were last season, and they were losing one of their best players, so that was a lot of production they had to replace at the same time. Ethan Barr and Deshaun Pace have been quite splendid so far this year, especially Pace, a Cincinnati transfer. This guy's been phenomenal in all areas, and you can consider him probably the patroller of this unit. You'll see him in a variety of different looks. Shedeur Sanders, not much of a running threat. He's definitely mobile, but he's not going to typically hurt you for too much in terms of being a true dual threat. But Pace right now, 19 tackles leading the way. Crodrick Bullard, he's mainly a defensive back, but he plays a lot in the box. So you can sometimes consider him to be a linebacker. And then Barr, even though he has 9 tackles, he's been a consistent player for them. and had his best career game for the Knights, that is, this season against TCU. So the linebacking group, Nick, so far they're exceeding expectations, but this will be their toughest matchup, even if there is no run game threat in terms of coverage and potentially spying at times this quarterback and not letting him get loose with his legs. It's going to be important.
For me, this linebacking core is when you look at like when you're in school and your first month, you're exceeding expectations, you're doing your homework on time, but you haven't had that first real big test of your semester or year, and that's what they're going to have against Colorado here. This is an opportunity for this linebacking core to show that they're very strong and able to build up to this task and live up to this task. Deshaun Pace, top tackler for this team, 19 total tackles, tackle for loss and a pick for him. I like it. Cyree Alexander, 9 total tackles, tackle for loss. Ethan Barr, 9 total tackles and a pass breakup. Josiah Pierre, 7 total tackles as well. Bullard, who you move in the slot a little bit, load the box with him, 15 total tackles. He's a solid coverage asset as well. I've been impressed so far. They've definitely blown me away compared to my expectations. This is a huge test, though. Can they fight against this secondary or this passing attack for Colorado? Can they help the secondary, who looks to potentially be at a disadvantage against a really strong passing attack that Colorado has?
Yeah, this UCF secondary, they were pretty bad against TCU. Obviously there's no slouch there. That Sonny Dykes scheme and the quarterback they have is really good. 402 yards and 4 touchdowns, though. They did shore up in the second half and did enough to escape with a 1-point victory. But this matchup's not going to be any easier. Maybe from a scheme perspective it will be, but you still have more talented receivers, more talented quarterback as well. And obviously your pass rush liabilities are evident. Even though if you can generate enough pressure on the interior, you can make plays. But this is a guy who can make plays out of the pocket as well. So the secondary has to be better. Mac McWilliams, Brandon Adams, the 2 starting corners. Anthony Jackson, whenever he gets on the field, those are going to be your 3 mainstays. Brandon Marshall, a veteran in the slot. He's a pretty good average asset. He's been a very poor tackler this season, though. And then at safety, Sheldon Arnold. And, of course, the aforementioned Bullard, who's a pretty versatile player for them. Arnold is their best defensive back so far this year. Certainly have worries about how the secondary will do. They have picked off 4 passes. Deshaun Pace has one of those, of course, at linebacker. They didn't have any picks against TCU. They had 2 each against the weak opponents they started the season off with. So maybe, again, some skewed stats there, Nick. This will be an interesting matchup here to see how these DBs can fare. Not having the stress of having to come down and help and run support, though, I think is certainly going to allow them to play some more free-flowing ball in the back end, and it's going to allow them to be more disciplined with their assignments.
There's some solid pieces in the secondary, but I do need to see a little bit more out of them. Sheldon Arnold, 11 total tackles for him, a 1 pick as well. Braden Marshall, 8 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 picks. Mac McWilliams, 6 total tackles and a pick for him. Anthony Jackson, 5 total tackles, a pick, 2 pass breakups. And Brandon Adams, 4 total tackles and 1 pass breakup. This is a big test for them. They're going to have to find a way to be strong because, Sanders, he can pick you apart all day long. He's going to attack you over and over again. Can they win the battle against these really solid Colorado wide receivers? That's something you have to certainly keep your eye on.
Now, looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons at quarterback, KJ Jefferson's great. He's a veteran. He's played in the SEC for a good bit, but in terms of pro projection, he's not even anywhere close to Shedeur. At wide receiver, clear edge there. Running back, clear edge for the Knights. And then I think the next 3 in the trenches, they're much better. At linebacker so far, even though you can call that even, I certainly think that Colorado's earned enough respect for that to be an even category. And then the secondary, I think the Buffaloes will get the nod there as well. This is kind of, a good matchup, Nick, because both teams have strong qualities. This is a fun matchup altogether. And, if people have listened to the entire breakdown so far, they'll see that there's plenty of advantages for both teams to go around.
I think this is certainly something you can look at where there's a good balance between these 2 teams. Yes, there are advantages on both sides of the ball, but I think they have weaknesses and strengths that cancel each other out, which is a big key here. Obviously, Colorado's secondary I think is a lot better than UCF, and that's the big gulf in class for me is right there. But also at quarterback, I think that's a big split between the 2 teams. I like what this tail of the tape looks like. I think it's balanced between these 2 this matchup going down in Orlando.
One of the final thoughts in the prediction. Keys to the game for Colorado. Keep letting Sanders air it out. Must find some negative plays versus the run, though, and I think those DBs will have to be big in doing so. For UCF, find some pass rush versus a poor O-line. Let the run game do its thing. High-scoring affair here. I really think Colorado can cover this, but I think UCF, they're going to look to make a statement in this one because Gus Malzahn just seems like the type of guy that would love to steal some thunder away from a team that's getting a lot of hype at the moment. I think this run game will do its thing. Nick, Colorado's been good up until this point, but I think this is going to be a tough matchup for them. Are they get exposed a little bit? And I think in terms of pass rush, I do think that interior will be able to win at times to make things a little tough, which typically doesn't phase Shedeur, but I think, at times here it certainly will. High scoring affair here, 14-point line, though I definitely think is kind of heavy. Even though I'm not picking them to cover it, I don't fully understand it because I think this passing attack can have a day. But I'm going to take UCF to get the job done here, Nick. This is too good of a team. They're too consistent with running the ball. And again, Malzahn's going to have fun in this one.
Totally agreeing with you here. I think Colorado is just not going to be good enough to win this game. I like UCF at the bounce house. That's an underrated environment. It's going to be loud in there. That place is going to be rocking. Those fans are going to care. This team is 3-0, and a win over Colorado here would most likely get this team ranked, in my opinion. They're contenders in the Big 12. This offense can figure out how to pass a little bit better in this game if they do not have to run the ball a whole lot. But I think they'll be able to run the ball a lot against this Colorado defense, get some points on the board. I have them barely covering the 14 points with a 15-point win, although I could see it being closer to 20 points. I like what this UCF offense has. I worry about the secondary. I think that's certainly a key, but I do think this pass rush will finally get some big moments and get some nice tackles for loss and sacks, which will really help out this secondary, relieve some of the pressure on them. I like what can happen in this matchup. I'm a big fan of UCF here. I like them to win this game and make a big statement. Gus Malzahn, a team at 4-0 in the Big 12 that looks wide open. This team is certainly a team to keep an eye on. I think it's a job done on Saturday.
A big must-win kind of game for UCF, I'd say. They play Colorado here, and they play at Florida, Cincinnati, Iowa State, BYU after that. I mean, that's going to be a tough stretch. I know Florida's not all that great, still an SEC opponent. They're knocking on the door of potentially 3 ranked opponents in a row if the Bearcats can handle business. So, I mean, this is a very important stretch. And then even Arizona's after that, Nick. So, I mean, a lot in front of UCF, and they got to go out there and prove it. And I think this is an opportunity they can't let slip away to start 4-0. That's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me. Love this game, though. It's going to be one of the highest viewed matchups of the weekend.
Super exciting matchup that I really think will be a fun game to watch. Colorado, obviously, a lot of people want to see them again and again. They're a national phenomenon. But UCF, underrated team, I think is a really good team on offense. That has a lot going for them. Tough schedule ahead, but this would be a big one to get in Gus Malzahn's pocket to back that one up and figure out what they can do for the rest of the season.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.